Ovaj panel održava se u čast Gavina McFadjena, nedavno preminulog novinara koji je bio poznat kao zaštitnik i borac za prava uzbunjivača. Gavin je bio američki novinar, autor dokumentarnih filmova i suosnivač grupe za podršku uzbunjivačima Zviždač, odnosno Whistler. Bio je suosnivač i Centra za istraživačko novinarstvo, pomagao je osnivanje komiteta za odbranu Љiљана Assangea, bio je gostujući profesor na nekoliko univerziteta i vodio je mnoge radionice o uzbunjivanju za medije. Umro je u nedelju 22. oktobra u Londonu u 76. godini. Učesnici ovog panela su Hans-Mартин Тилак, Јасмине Мотарџеми, Љиљана Смајловиć, a Skype-om će nam se priključiti Antoine Deltour. Ja ću vrlo kratko reći samo po nekoliko rečenica, možda pre reči o svakome od njih. Hans-Mартин Тилак je novinar koji je razotkrio korupciju u Eurostatu, telu Evropske unije koje se bavi statističkim podacima. Međutim, sam se našao pod optužbom da je podmićivao funkcionere Evropske unije, a situaciju mu je zakomplikovalo to što nije želeo da oda svoje izvore. Bio je pritvoren, dokumentacije, kompjuteri su mu zaplenjeni, ali je posle dužeg procesa dokazao da nije kriv i sva dokumentacija mu je vraćena. Јасмине Мотарџеми radila je u kompaniji Nестле u Švajcarskoj na kontroli kvaliteta hrane za decu, naročito za bebe, i sa kompanijom se sukobila kada je otkrila slučajeve zataškavanja afera o nekvalitetnoj i opasnoj hrani koju Nестле proizvodi. Otpuštena je 2010. godine i zbog svog angažmana trpela je i materijalno i zdravstveno. Posebne teškoće imala je sa medijima koji nisu uvek želeli da se zameraju jednom od najvećih oglašivača. Љiљana Смајловиć bila je glavna urednica politike najstarijeg dnevnog lista u regionu u 2 navrata i tokom svojih mandata sukobljavala se i sa vlastima i sa kompanijama zbog objavljivanja tekstova koji im nisu bili po volji, ali i zbog odbijanja da otkrije izvore na osnovu kojih su ti tekstovi nastajali. Konačno, Antoine Deltour objavio je dokumente o nagodbama vlasti Luksemburga sa nekim velikim kompanijama zarad izbjegavanja poreza, takozvane LuxLeaks. On je to učinio kao bivši radnik ПрајсвотерхаусКуперса, verujući da je objavljivanje ovih podataka u interesu javnosti. Vlasti u Luksemburgu pokrenule su istragu protiv njega i uprkos pritisku medija i javnosti osuđen je na 12 meseci zatvora uslovno. Žalio se na tu presudu i taj postupak je sada u toku. Mi smo se dogovorili, budući da su svi učesnici ovog, to jest većina učesnika razgovora govori na engleskom, mi smo se dogovorili da i ovaj razgovor bude na engleskom, budući da prevod u sali postoji i nadam se da će teći mnogo brže i efikasnije za sve. Hvala vam na razumevanju za to. So, we decided to speak in English so we can be more efficient and we can react quickly to what anybody is saying. I'll start with you, Јасмине. Was it a difficult decision to approach media in your case?
To approach Edouard Perrin, you mean?
Sorry, I'm asking Јасмине. Antoine, because I missed to say that you're going to join us by Skype, but I'll call you in a minute. So.
Yeah. The decision to approach the media was not a difficult decision, but on the other hand, to make them listen to me and report, that was a difficult undertaking.
By your opinion, why was it?
Well, in Switzerland, basically I can say that except for 1 or 2 media, most newspapers teamed up with Nестле. And I believe it's either because they are afraid of losing income for advertisement, or they're afraid of being sued, or is that I believe for some media sources, the editor-in-chief was appointed by a group where the industry has a big influence. So these people are also trying to protect their own job.
Did you know anything about media when you approached them?
Yes, I was actually a corporate food safety manager in Nесtlе. So in that capacity, I had very often contact with the media, and I knew...
But as a corporate person?
Yes, as a corporate
So
person.
this was something completely different?
Yes, but I knew how media work. I knew how media work, which media would be interested. And I would like also to mention that what was one of my most disappointing experience is not necessarily on the general media, which is for the general public, but on the professional media. That means all those journalists who write for professional, like food journals and so on. And the fact that they were not interested to know what I have experienced and what I am reporting, that was the biggest disappointment.
When you say that they were not interested, were they privately interested or they were not interested at all?
They were not interested at all.
And that was surprising to you?
Yes. And I just can, I mean, it was, of course, it's not only the journalists, but it was also the professional associations. How can they go and publish journals on food safety and not be interested to hear what the corporate food safety manager of the biggest food company in the world has to say about food safety management? And I want to say that I was not only the corporate food safety manager of Nestlé, but I was also 10 years senior scientist in the World Health Organization and has been participating in development of our food safety management system. So I have 36 years of professional experience in food safety. I've been behind some of our systems that we are today implementing. I'm the editor-in-chief of the first encyclopedia of food safety. I'm the editor-in-chief of the book on food safety management for industries, which received an award in the United States. I was an international person invited to all the conferences. And yet, when I'm coming here and to report that I have seen certain things which shows dysfunction in our system of food safety management, nobody is interested to hear, and not even professional journalists.
You say nobody. Does it mean really nobody, or there was some different media, some different journalists who really thought that they should talk to you?
In the professional area, nobody. There was nobody in the professional area.
Okay,
and
so
I was also, I want to say, I was active also for many NGOs, drafting guidelines for many NGOs and so on. So in my professional area, nobody. In reference newspapers, there was only Tag und Anzeiger, which made a decent article. But I want also to say that those newspapers in Switzerland who decided to write on my case, they didn't do it in the beginning when I was saying, hey, I have something to report. It was when the court hearing started and the top management of the company was called to court. So what was more interesting for the newspaper was not my story, but the fact that the two CEOs of the company, CEO of Nestlé Group, Mr. Paul Bulke, and CEO of Nespresso, Mr. Jean-Marc Duvoisin, and also the top management of the company was called to court. That was the news, not my issue. And there were never a follow-up to come and hear how the company is replying to my allegations. And the company came, the management of the company came and made the most ridiculous statement, which is per se a bigger scandal than what they did. What they replied in the court were bigger scandal than what I was actually denouncing originally. And there is no media who is reporting.
We'll get back to that. I want to ask Antoine now. Antoine, I'm addressing you. I know it is a little bit difficult to communicate this way, but you have, or you had a different experience with media. You were approached by journalists to tell your story. Is that correct? Oh, sorry, just for a second, we can't hear you.
Yes, sorry.
Yes.
Actually, my first intention was to contact some NGOs because I wanted to validate that the documents I had were of public interest. And it wasn't my first intention to contact some journalists. What I did actually is just that I wrote a comment on internet under an article talking about tax issues, and then Edouard Perrin contacted me. So I didn't initiate the contact, but Edouard Perrin came to me and to ask more information because my comment looked very well informed.
And why did you trust him?
Actually, it was more the opportunity that decided me, because if I had taken the initiative, maybe I would have contacted a journalist from the written press. But I trusted Edouard Perrin because he was working in a media firm with some people with a very good reputation, like Paul Morera. Maybe you don't know in Serbia, but who is well known in France for good documentaries.
So you did some checking on him before you started talking to him?
Yes, of course.
And would that be your advice to other whistlers, to do the same thing?
Yes, it's very important to trust the journalist to whom you give some information, and maybe the first thing to do is to take some advice from third parties, like NGOs working with whistleblowers, for example, Transparency International, because maybe before contacting journalists, you need to be sure that that the information you have deserves that you take such risks. Because once you have talked to a journalist, then you risk to lose the control of the information, and you must be sure that you really want the information to be public. It's a big decision.
You got quite a lot of support from the media. It didn't help at all. I mean, not at all, but it didn't help all the way in the court. But how did you feel with that? Did you feel more reassured being supported by media and by the public?
It's very helpful. At the beginning, I was only an anonymous source, and the decision to come forward was taken with my lawyers. It was an advice to get some support once I was in trial, and this has been helpful. For instance, I've been invited to the European Parliament in an official committee tax matters, the tax committee that has been created after the LuxLeaks scandal, and it could have never happened without being public. And of course, no, the media are very, very helpful to get some public pressure on the deciders. Of course, the justice need to keep independent, but the attention of the public help the judges to understand that the decisions they are taking are followed by a part of the European opinion.
Antoine, thank you for now. I'll call you later again. We are returning to my colleagues here on the panel. Hans-Martin, we heard two different, how would I say, situations with our panelists. One was very supported by media, the other was not at all. So as a journalist, how do you feel about that?
I mean, I entirely believe both stories, and both are credible. And it is so that especially when it comes to journalism on corporate affairs, journalists are often very much under the influence of the corporate leaders, because they need the good relationship to the press service, to the spokespeople, to the people of the board of the companies they report on, there's no alternative source of information for them. So they tend to then tend to take the view of the company. At least there's a big risk. The same thing happened when I was in Brussels as a correspondent. There's the EU Commission. There is no opposition in the EU Parliament, and many correspondents in Brussels tended to side with the Commission, whatever happened. I was one of the few journalists who also was open to whistleblowers, and that's why there were quite many who turned to me and gave information to me, and then I was often able to confirm what I got information-wise and could do stories, and that was embarrassing the Commission. That's why they then looked indeed for ways to find my sources. And it is indeed so that when you are a whistleblower, I would say, you have to go to journalists who you trust, of course, in principle, but then it's always more evident that someone might be reporting about your case when these are journalists who are not dependent in their daily reporting or weekly reporting on the company which you are working for, because then you risk to find people who have deaf ears to your case.
So if Yasmin was approaching you, what would you do? I mean, with all her reputation and everything that you saw in her CV.
I mean, if I was, if she was approaching me, I would try, of course, first to get some basic information. I would try to meet her in person if possible. I would travel to the place where she lives or where she can meet me, and I would like to see as much documentation as possible. Then, of course, taken from that, I would need to decide: is it a story, or is it possibly a story? Then I would have to do additional research, checks, verify the documentation, check against other sources. Actually, one question which has been discussed in the last panel, good faith. I, of course, are also always interested in the motives one possible source might have, but I also have always said in my whole career that that's interesting, but might be a motive. What is more important, though, is first, can I verify the information? Is it true? Is the person honest? And can he or she deliver proof? And secondly, is it relevant to the public? That's what counts. And that's the principle I've lived by. And who can ever look into the hearts of someone? Like, how will I ever be able to decide finally what someone's motives might be? For me, what counts is the information important for the public, and can I verify it?
So in this particular case, what would be your decision?
I mean, I don't know her story well enough to tell, but as I suppose that there were indeed at least some reports, it was apparently something which was meant for the public record, and so yeah, I would try to meet her, try to check, and then publish.
Yes.
I would like to make two additional points which is relevant to this discussion. One is that one of the reasons I decided to sue the company Nестле was because I doubted that, I suspected that perhaps what I'm going to say will not be believed by journalists. So by suing the company, I put all of my documents to the court, and I just delivered to any journalist, including New York Times, who, for instance, I sent all my file to New York Times, and then they made an appointment with me, and then they became silent. Suddenly they became silent.
Even when you sue them to the court? So
when I sued Nестле to court, then I contacted New York Times, and I delivered all my file to New York Times, and then they made an appointment with me to interview me, but then suddenly they didn't call, and they went silent. And this kind of situation I experienced with many media. The second thing that I want to say in regard to whistleblowers is that when a whistleblower is contacting the media wants all the proof, all the documents, and so on. That's fair enough. But when they go and interview Nесtlé, they just publish the statements of Nесtlé without checking anything. And that's, I mean, I don't say in general, this is what happened to me. They didn't check anything. They just published the statement of Nесtlé verbatim, even when they had the proof of the contrary. So This is the dilemma. Why a whistleblower has to prove and Nestle doesn't have to prove?
Liljo, can we get your opinion on that? Why is it happening?
Well, actually, I am so stunned by Yasmine's story, because and now she just raised the example of the New York Times, and I'm stunned to hear that no one came back to do a story, especially as you pointed out.
They did it first, but then they decided not to.
That's what I'm saying. That after reviewing the documentation, they did not get back to her, and with the background she had, it really is kind of amazing. But at the same time, I have to say that I was put to shame by our local whistleblower who addressed us, the medical doctor, Mr. Josifovsky, because when his story was broken, I think in a tabloid, I did not believe him. And now, as I sat here and listened to him earlier this morning, I asked myself, why didn't you believe it? And to tell you the truth, it's too terrible. It is too terrible. And I'm not even too shocked that no one's been prosecuted, because well, we heard our British and Canadian colleagues. Doctors are worse than the mafia. They stick together more than the mafia. There's this omerta, I guess, between them. But it's easy for them to be like that and to get away with it, because we don't want to believe terrible things about doctors. And you know, the Politica journalist that's here and I discussed this during the break, and he said he would try to look into this. I like to think that if Yasmine had approached me, we would have done a thorough job. But it's also true that in the newsrooms, even the newsroom of a large newspaper that I ran, we now have very few people. We would like all our whistleblowers to come and to be people who have irrefutable evidence, who have clearly the purest motives, no ulterior ones, and people who understand what public interest is and who will only present things that are clearly in the public interest. However, there's hardly any whistleblowers like that. They have a grudge, they have something that's pushing them to report on this, and they really don't care how much public interest, how much their personal, and of course they're right. So you have to ask one or more often a team of journalists to investigate, because as Hans-Mартин said, your job is not done when someone presents you with evidence. You have to check it. You see how they keep criticizing Julian Assange for this new word they put, the dumping material. This annoys me, by the way, that they use the word dump, because there's a lot of material, so if there's a lot of true, authentic material, you still call it a dump. Because I think there's a negative connotation to this dump, like he dumped this on the journalist. But in a way, it's true. We don't like things to be dumped because we need to attach reporters to the story. And we know that we're working against powerful people, the corporations, and that they're going to make it difficult, and that they're going to raise questions on everything. But on the other hand, Yasmine is right. Whenever someone just puts out a statement, corporate statement, will find its way into the newspaper because there is a corporation
standing behind it.
And most often aligned.
But it is fair to be suspicious and to say, well, I'm not sure if this is the right story. I don't want to be in the middle of some scandal that actually is made up.
This is the other thing. We try to tell our journalists to be very suspicious of politicians, and we say, you know, the way they teach you in American journalism schools, if your mother tells you she loves you, trust but verify. But at the same time, we also approach whistleblowers as we ask ourselves, what dark forces have propelled this person to bring so much misery on themselves? And it's difficult to believe that people undertake such things without that you always think there's got to be something else to that. So I think journalists are always looking at you, even if you bring wonderful information about, they're always saying, I wonder why they're trying to trick me with all this. So yes, it's important to verify, but I think we are too suspicious towards the brave, isolated individual, whereas anything a corporation puts out really does find it. And another way they stop you, you see, a colleague of mine also from Politica, former economy editor here, reminded me, we had a whistleblower from Smederevo. And if we cannot put a team of journalists to verify something, then the easy way, the lazy journalist way, is just to go to the corporation and say, these are the allegations, what do you have to say? Sometimes, in this case, I think it was the ministry, they say, this is so ridiculous, we don't even want to respond. Then we are in a bind, we can't verify, and we would like to put the information out, but to do that, we have to have the other side, so we're covered that we've tried to be fair, but if the other side doesn't want to comment, then you're really, you cannot even put this forward. In some cases you can when you've been able to verify it. Then we don't let the fact that the ministry will not respond stop us from publishing. But there's really a lot of dilemmas. I would like to think that as an editor I did what Hans-Mартин did, which is, if it's true, I couldn't care less what ulterior motives.
I wanted to ask you, Hans-Mартин. No, I mean, probably most of the whistleblowers are not angels themselves. They might have some baggage with them. So if they approach you with a story, or you approach them, and then somebody comes and tell you, but you have to have in mind this and that about that person, how much would that change your opinion on the story?
I mean, how many angels do you know? I don't know any, actually. My father was a parson. So
I know some people who are named angels, but...
I think indeed, like as I said before, motives are certainly not irrelevant, but what counts are relevance of the story and is the story true. And to add to what you said, it is indeed so that it's lazy and also easier for a reporter to just take the rebuttal of a company or a ministry. I also have seen many times I expose some stuff, some story, and then the lazy guy of the press agency who covers this ministry about which I'm writing, and he starts a story just with the defense ministry is denying reports that, So, I mean, that's the lazy way, but also the way with which some lazy reporter can get, make his living in the easiest way, because then he's still good friends with the spokesperson and the minister of the state ministry. So that risk is there, but that's indeed bad journalism. And we have all now seen the debate, I think, concerning the US election campaign, where also journalists at one point in time concluded that one cannot simply have Mr. Trump saying that Mr. Obama was not born in the US, and then bring this as a statement, and then just add the comment of Mr. Obama, it's untrue. You have, as a journalist, also an obligation to inform the public which claims are more likely to be true and which not. And that, of course, is especially true when it comes to also claims from whistleblowers, because journalists are not simply some people who have to hold the microphone to someone who says something into the microphone, but we have a role as a watchdog, as the European Court of Human Rights has said numerous times. Journalists have the role of a watchdog, and that's why we have to hold powerful politicians and corporate bosses accountable, and have to use hidden sources, whistleblowers, and use them correctly, and verify the information, and if we can verify it, publish.
You were, Lilia wanted to join. If you can.
I was just going to say, I'm glad Hans-Mартин reminded us of the American current election campaign. I mean, you have all these clearly authentic emails, and yet one campaign is making the argument all the time that we got this from the Russians, therefore the Russians want to interfere in our election, therefore we should disregard this material. But the press, by and large, is not disregarding. The American press, at least, is not disregarding the leaks, although they have been tainted, or the Clinton campaign is trying to taint the leaks by their provenance. It's the nasty Russians trying to interfere. But no one yet has even contested the authenticity of the leaks. So that really should be what's important.
Yeah, we got Aileen Chubb joining us. We'll see if we can get her. But before that, I want to ask Hans-Martin another thing. You yourself were defamated by the Brussels police, I believe, EU Commission, sorry, I mean, they accused you of bribing the dignitaries or whoever was in charge in officials. Okay, so what? How did that feel? I mean, it was almost like being a whistleblower by yourself.
Certainly the worst experience of my career, because if you write about corruption and then someone comes and insinuates, they didn't really accuse me, they had no proof, they were insinuating I would have bribed someone. I was not even ever charged, there was not even a case running against me, it was just like the attempt to spread rumors, but they indeed were putting pressure on the Belgian police with success to raid my place then in Brussels and my office. And of course, it felt like horrible, and so it's true that I can, from this experience, certainly understand very well what it must feel for a whistleblower when he gets then whatever defamated by his employer. I've seen in Brussels several times when Commission spokespeople, so-called off the records, were telling this whistleblower, she's a bad person, she is not serious, she has psychological problems, whatever, and of course in my case they try the same thing with me, but still, of course, one has to say one thing, my employer was not the one who was accusing me, it was the EU Commission or the anti-fraud office of the EU Commission. My employer was standing by my side and they were paying my lawyers and we went to the courts and we won in the end in the European Court of Human Rights against Belgium. We got damages and so I was certainly being put under pressure. They tried to destroy my career, that's obvious, but I was a journalist still and therefore I was in a better position than a whistleblower.
If it was different, if your employer was not standing by you, how would that be?
Of course, I mean that's of course the nightmare.
I mean, because Jasmine's employer was definitely not standing by her, not the media, so she was alone.
That's of course what journalists have to be aware of course, because journalists and whistleblowers, we need each other. Journalists need information in order to hold the powerful to account, in order to have stories. Whistleblowers need the media so they can make a public case against the employer, which shows that they're not some individual nutcases. But of course, it's a temporary relationship because journalists will move on to other stories. Whistleblowers will still have to fight their cases. And so it's really very important for journalists to understand that they are not just dealing with stories, but with people who they have to protect, whose anonymity they have to protect in case whistleblowers don't want to expose them. And of course, journalists have the obligation to verify as much as possible any information they get. So the story is then, when it's being published, can't be easily blown away by the company or the ministry or the government in places. So journalists have indeed to use all their skills in order to get the story right, so that neither them nor the whistleblower gets under additional pressure.
Okay, we're joined by Aileen Chubb, so I would take this opportunity to address her. Thank you for joining us, and I'll just briefly say, because I didn't announce you at the beginning, Aileen Chubb is the co-founder of the Whistler website, and along with the Gavimek Fadjan, and also whistleblower herself. Aileen, why was it so important to establish Whistler? We lost her again. Oh. Okay, well, I'll go back to Antoine. Antoine, when you decided to go public with the story, first you said that you gave some of the evidences on the internet, and then you talked to the reporters. So when you decided that, Did you know how difficult is it going to become for you personally?
No, I didn't imagine the magnitude of the consequences, and I thought that I would remain an anonymous source, and I couldn't imagine that there would be such consequences, legal consequences with the trial, and such media attention. But I think that the whistleblowers and the journalists have a partnership. They have the same role of informing the public, and that's why there is a natural confidence. But in some cases, there can be also some different interests because the journalists may want to disclose the more information possible, but the interest of the whistleblower is sometimes to preserve his anonymity, and this sometimes cannot be coherent.
That's the thing I wanted to ask you. Why didn't you ask for anonymity?
That was my intent.
I think I lost everybody.
And actually, once Edouard Perrin released his first investigation, then PwC in Luxembourg made an internal investigation to find the source, and then I was identified.
Okay, so principally the same question for you, Yasmin. Why didn't you approach media anonymously? I mean, without disclosing your position, just giving the details and telling them, why don't you investigate this story? Sorry, the microphone.
I stand for freedom of expression. I stand for what I say, what I think. I didn't want to be anonymous.
So you had no reservations, no second thoughts about that? You wanted to go public?
I want even to say that the decision that eventually one day I will go public was taken while I was still in the company, and I was reporting to the director of compliance, and he said to me, we won't do anything, you can turn to the law. And I told them that you can be sure that my court of justice will not be only Switzerland, because I knew that I will perhaps not get justice in Switzerland. I said the court of justice for me will be the world, because what I was interested is to know, how does the public, the world population see my story? Do they think what happened to me is acceptable? And if what has happened to me is acceptable, what it means for them, for their kids, for their food? I was curious to know that. So if I want to know the view of the public, I have to go with my own face.
With your name, yes. Eileen Chubb, I'm trying to reach you again. Thank you for joining us. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. Well, I tried to ask you a question a few minutes ago, but the line broke, so I'll just repeat it. Why was it important to establish Whistler?
I'm a whistleblower myself, and we were the first to use the UK law, which did not protect us. As a result of my experiences, I realised that other whistleblowers would not be protected by law. So that's why we started a campaign. And since then, thousands of whistleblowers have contacted us.
So you think this is like a hub for whistleblowers, the secure place where they can approach somebody who can then go with the story further in the media or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, originally I founded Compassion and Care, and the majority of whistleblowers that were coming through, 70% were healthcare, 30% were other sectors, and that's why we founded Whistler with Gavin McFadden, because there were so many whistleblowers from all sectors, and there was such a need for help.
So how do you decide on which story is worth publishing on your website? Which whistleblower you should trust?
Obviously, all their details are confidential. Some people want to tell their story. Some people want to relate their experience, but to do so without using their name. So we gather all of the evidence and we present it to government in our campaign to change the law for Edna's Law. So every story is valid. 99% of people who contact us are genuine whistleblowers. 1% are not. They just, for whatever reason. But 99% of people are genuine whistleblowers. And we work closely with the media. And one of the biggest things we've done lately is we worked with BBC Panorama, where 14 staff lost their job in a care home after reporting abuse. Nothing was done. And these whistleblowers came to us, and we put them in touch with Panorama, who went in and filmed everything that the staff were saying. Obviously, we have a to Panorama. There's very little in the way of protection here. And the worst kinds of abuses are being covered up. And we need the media to help us expose what's going on.
Has it ever happened to you that you had a good story and that media didn't want to go along with it? That media were not accepting it?
Sorry, can I?
Yes. Has it ever happened to you that you had a good story and the media rejected it? Nobody wanted to publish the story.
Obviously, all whistleblowing cases are complicated, and it takes a long time to gather all the information and make a proper assessment. Some stories suit certain media outlets. Certain stories suit television, to be referred to a TV station, or some cases where it needs a print media to tell the story. So it depends on the circumstances. But most people want us to help them because they want the wrongdoing stopped. And that's really crucial to the whistleblower. And that is the thing that's not happening without the media here. If it wasn't for the media, we couldn't stop the abuse that's happening.
So isn't it enough if you publish the story on your own website?
Yeah.
Would that be enough, for the story to roll out?
Yes. We do put people's stories up on our website when people want to tell that story. And that does actually have an impact. But, we do need the national media to get the story picked up on as well.
Eileen, thank you for now. That's the question for two of you, because with the new role of social media, there is a chance that you might not need the regular media, at least at the beginning. So, Hans-Martin, what would you say about that? Is it worth finding ways to publish your story on internet, on social media, and then see who catches it up? That's something similar to what Antoine was doing.
Obviously, social media allows everyone to express him or herself more easily publicly, opinion-wise or with factual-based stories. But it's still so that today the big media organizations still have some sort of gatekeeper functions. Also, WikiLeaks over many years has practiced this, that they partnered up with big media organizations who then help to verify stuff and decide what to publish and what not. And of course, the role of the big media organizations might further diminish because we all lose circulation and revenue over time, and then new outlets might come up for investigations. But I think social media alone will not be it, because still I think it's helpful for the public if they know that not just some John Doe says something, but that some established media organization or some established journalist says something. On the other hand, for journalists also, social media helps finding sources, actually. I just did some big investigation with a colleague about some big retailer in Germany, some drugstore chain, and they had exploited, or they still exploit cheap labor for filling their shelves in their thousands of shops. We had talked, before we published our first story, to around about 40 people who had worked for the retail chain and the subcontractor. And afterwards, 60 more approached us also. And many of those first 40 initial sources we found through social media. which was not possible some years ago. So social media also help established journalists of established media outfits to increase their sort of basis when it comes to social.
But if you could not run the story, would you go to social media?
I mean, until now at least, I'm fully employed by my magazine for which I work, and so I have to publish.
Hypothetically, I mean, so you have angels.
Let's say I wouldn't call them angels. I wouldn't go that far as calling my employers angels, although of course I appreciate them very much. But of course, like if I was a freelancer, I mean, would look for other alternative ways to publishing stuff I have. But my first choice would always be some established news organization. I think still until today.
Liljo, what about concessions that you have to make? I mean, you are the journalist, but also you are the part of the corporation. So you have to follow some corporate rules. And the managers who are providing financing to your media might say, we don't want to go there because it will cost us a lot. So what can you do in such situation?
Well, I'm sure this is an issue in most newspapers. I have to say that in my case, I just never paid any attention to what the management said. And, you know, I guess I would be your Serbian equivalent of the nasty woman. So my managers never tried to stop me. We always ignored them. There are times, I'll be honest, there are times when I would inquire whether some company is a major advertiser. And I didn't want, and I would call the management to ask how big an advertiser is this, just so I have the information before I go with the story. But the managers never did try to stop me. They would ask me why. I would say, well, there's a story and we're pursuing it. So, but I'm sure this is a major question in most publications.
Yes, Hans-Martin, what was your experience about that? Has anyone, Hans, I'm asking you, what was your experience about that? Has anybody ever told you such a thing that you should maybe reconsider because this is a very important company for us, not to speak about the EU Commission?
I mean, the number of advertisers we have anyways decreasing by year by year, so the number of possible possible blackmailing is going down, but I've never experienced
I wouldn't necessarily call it blackmailing, but let's put a nice
no, of course, you're right.
conditioning.
You're right. It might be the case that my editors might consider they rather publish something not in order to not anger some advertiser. Although, of course, there have been cases where advertisers have withdrawn advertising from like a colleague of mine years ago published like a number of stories on scandals in the pharma industry, and then the pharma industry stopped advertising in our magazine. I think nobody would tell me openly because according to our own corporate charter, we may not be we may not decide according to the interests of the advertising. So it would be against the rules, against the compliance rules. So nobody would do it openly, which of course would not certainly in all cases exclude this from happening in any given corporation, I suppose, but I have not experienced it myself.
So you must earn the nickname Bad Hombre if Lilja is nasty woman now. So Lilja, you wanted to add?
Actually, see how careless I've been with my management. I forgot to mention that 8 years ago, in fact, I did lose for the paper all the. In Serbia, there's the biggest tycoon, the richest man in Serbia, is called Miroslav Mišković. He was not happy with the way his company was covered in the paper that I edited, and he invited me to his offices to point that out to me, and I said I disagreed and would not oblige him, and he pulled all the advertising, absolutely all. But I was lucky in the sense that this was before 2008, before the collapse of the advertising market. So we didn't even care. And to follow up on what Hans-Martin said, at the time, our co-owner was a German company. The German manager, the business manager from the German company went with me to this meeting at this corporation's meeting, and he told them, you cannot blackmail us with advertising. We are not going to give in. Even if you threaten to pull advertising, we're not going to try to interfere in the editorial side. And really, they followed through. They did not. Not even the Germans tried to get me to change the editorial stance. We lost the advertising, but at the time we had a lot of advertising. I don't know what would have happened 2 years later when the advertising market crashed.
Yeah. Yes. Before I asked everybody else to ask the question, I want to ask one final by myself, and that will be, what would be your advice? I'll start with Eileen. What would be your advice to a whistleblower when he's approaching media or when he is approached by media? How he or she should prepare?
Well, obviously, try to get some advice from an organisation that helps whistleblowers. They'll often be able to give you the name of a journalist who is proven to look after whistleblowers. So that would be the first step, I'd say, to contact a reliable organisation. Secondly, I'd say to do a very brief summary of your case in bullet points, because often as not, whistleblowers want to bombard people with hundreds of documents which won't be read, doesn't get the story across initially. So to give them the best chance, I always say, imagine what the headline is and try to get the core issues in what you're trying to disclose across, but in a one-page document to start with. And that's very effective.
Thank you. Yasmin, did you use any of this when you were approaching media, and did you learn something new about how would you do it if you were again in the same position? Microphone.
Yes, I did. I did prepare a press release summarizing my story and my what I was trying to pass as a message. But if I look back, not today, I would say I would have written a book about my story myself so that I could prepare the information for the media. The reason is that my story is very complex, as many people have said. It's more like an impressionist type of painting where each event by itself might not be spectacular, but when you put the whole story together, you get an image of the dysfunction of the biggest food company in the world at the top level, highest level I'm referring. So I think I should have written a book first.
Hans-Martin, what would be your advice?
My advice to whistleblowers would be to look first who might be a journalist you might be able to trust, who might not be someone who is anyway covering the organization in which you are working, so someone who is not dependent of the press people and the board members or the minister of the organization which you are working. Find someone, a journalist independent of that. Look for as much possible documentation, evidence as possible, and then try to meet this person then good luck. Of course, I know it's a big decision. There was this one case of this Norwegian former Siemens employee who knew about dubious dealings of the German company Siemens with the Norwegian Defense Ministry, and he said before he first approached a journalist, he felt like jumping from the 5th floor, like through a window. It might be, of course, a difficult decision, but better you prepare, the better.
Yeah. Do you tell them before you? Once when you see that this is a genuine thing, do you tell them this is going to be tough? Are you really ready for this? Do you give them a chance to maybe change their mind?
Actually, in almost every case I had been working with whistleblowers, they were trying to keep their anonymity. And of course, I have told them, look, if you give me this, they cannot directly attack me because this is, for example, stuff which so many people have like me, so there is no risk. Or I tell them, okay, it's true, if only 3 persons were in this meeting, then there is a risk they come back to you, and of course then one has to see, has the employer or former employer any kind of possible way of retaliation, like can he cut pension payments, whatever, like, and of course as a journalist, I have the duty to check which risk I impose on a possible source, because if there is someone who has afterwards trouble or is exposed, it like also reflects badly on me, and it might badly affect the way I can in the future work with whistleblowers. So of course I have to check with whistleblowers what might happen to them, and I have to be there in order to help to avoid avoidable consequences. And yeah.
Yeah. Is it difficult to protect the source? You had such cases in your career.
No, it's not difficult to protect a source. If you want to
Even
protect
if they
your
threat
source,
you, if they say, well, then we will consider you as responsible for whatever happens.
Look, I had, in the early 2000s, I had the Hague Tribunal, I got in their crosshairs. I had published something, they wanted to know where I got it, and they sent an investigator. And at the time, the Hague Tribunal was a scary thing. This is like 2002. And the prosecutor was trying to intimidate me very clearly and telling me that I was going to be charged, but that we needed to talk because they wanted to know that they were not going to prosecute me if I would give them the source. But of course I was not going to do that, and eventually with the help of a very good American lawyer, this challenge was deflected. But I was just going to say that if someone is going to contact a journalist with information, of course they should read the papers, see if they like someone, if they think that from somebody's articles they've deduced that it's someone who's not afraid of taking on authority.
Like to trust him.
Yes, whether you can trust a journalist, but then when you go to the journalist, I love Tom Devine's definition of an analyst as someone who has no first-hand knowledge at all. But if you want to be a whistleblower, you should stress that you have first-hand knowledge. You should lay your evidence heavily, and don't say what every whistleblower tells us. I have something, but I don't know if you're brave enough to publish it. Because often it's really irritating, because often it's not about bravery, it's about whether you can check their information or not. So,
well, Jasmine might disagree about that. But let me see if we have questions. I left probably 10 to 15 minutes, please. Here's the mic coming. On your right side.
My name is Rudolf Elmer, and I blew the whistle on Julius Baer Banks in Switzerland. And I was in a situation to think about how I approach my thing. And unfortunately, I was under enormous pressure, and I approached a psychologist. The psychologist gave me the name of an independent journalist who has been reporting about the Swiss financial industry for 30 years. So I knew I'm talking to one who knows the business. And I also agreed with that independent journalist that I provide the information, but I want to have the control if you're going to publish it or not. And the psychologist explained to me, this is the journalist who, even if it's a good story, it's not going to be published if you don't want to by that independent journalist. So that was an important point for me, to make sure that I kept under control. And with that independent journalist, we actually published then one little story about the issue, and we learned in Switzerland that information simply disappeared in the black hole, even so it was number one of the president of number one media house. Then, so it's an important from a whistleblower's point of view that you can stop the publishing. I think that's absolutely key, even so the story is good. Secondly, I've made good experience with the Süddeutsche Zeitung. I published newspapers in News Süddeutsche information to them, gave them to them. But before I talked to them, I checked the newspapers to find out what sort of advertisements are in there. is there a Julius Baer advertisement in there? No, so I provided them with information. They published, and now 8 years later, I'm on the court trial, 2014, I've learned that Julius Baer actually started to buy or to make advertisement in Süddeutsche Zeitung, half a page, a full page, and so on. So when I was in court in 2014, the Süddeutsche Zeitung published a story about myself looking like a mentally sick person, which I have to say, I wouldn't have expected that from the Süddeutsche Zeitung, but that's the way it goes, and that's real life. So you have to be careful not only at the beginning, you have to know what's going on with the newspaper as well in the long run.
We have more questions here.
This is more of a suggestion or answer to one of your questions, but where I work at the Government Accountability Project, we rely on partnerships with the media in order to win in the cases. And two lessons that I've learned is, first, that many whistleblowers do have a lot of evidence, too much evidence initially. They'll bring in 1, 2, or more boxes of evidence, and it's a little dysfunctional. It's a little intimidating. It's going to take until the journalist has a large chunk of time just to be able to study it and decide whether it's effective proof. And so we coach the whistleblowers and work with them to, before they approach the journalist, condense everything into a 1 to 2 page summary of the key themes, the key conclusions, and the key facts that can be proved from going through those boxes of documents. And it helps to make it more realistic to recruit partners in the media.
What if the whistleblower is simply not capable in doing that?
Well, that's where I would second Eileen's point, that it really makes a big difference to get a partner with an NGO that's worked with whistleblowers in the past or that has subject matter expertise in whatever issue that you're challenging, because they know the forest from the trees, and they can extract and isolate the key themes that'll be on the cutting edge, that they're not just things that everybody knows already or everybody suspects, but are new information that will advance the issue. The second thing that we've learned is, following up on Rudolph's point, is that it's not very effective just to have one story. They do get forgotten about, no matter how dramatic and effective the story was, how good a job the journalist did. So we usually try to negotiate that there'll be a series of articles that do in-depth work on different themes that are different pieces of the whole puzzle before we decide which journalist will actually end up working with its partners.
Thank you. Any more? Okay, I can conclude then with the final question that I would like to hear. What if, I mean, that's basically for Ljilja and Hans-Martin, and that will be, what if the whistleblower comes from the media company? We have such cases like we had this summer, I think, in Fox News. And I mean, whom is he supposed to address? Ljilja, would you like to go first?
Well, we should say the journalists are much like the doctors and much like the mafia. They don't like to attack each other, at least not in this country. But because I'm also the president of the Journalists Association, I tried to break that mold and to encourage colleagues to write about what happens at other newspapers. The newspapers never forgive you. It's incredible. They have institutional memory. They resent terribly that you meddle in their business, and it's unhappy for the person that you assign to cover the story. We've done it, but it's been very unpleasant for our colleagues. So the journalists go through the same things as the whistleblowers go in their company. They're never forgiven for having broken the story from.
You are certainly right, Ljiljana. And but I did some years ago a big story for a colleague about a slightly competing weekly magazine in Germany, some People magazine, about which we could prove that they'd paid an agency to spy upon politicians, the private life of politicians actually, where someone had some new love affair. And we broke the story. It was a huge embarrassment for this magazine, which indeed was published or is being published in a big competing media corporation, obviously. And it's true that they didn't forget, you're completely right, because some years later, then in the aftermath of some other scandal in which I was involved in publishing big parts of it about our former president Wolf, then this People magazine tried to smear me with allegations which were untrue, and we had to go to court against them. I won in court against them actually for defamation. So they don't forget, you're right, because it's true like that there are many people also in Germany in the media business who say one shouldn't attack each other because one wouldn't know when one might self then appear on the bench of the accused, but still, of course, also media need people who expose their wrongdoing, and of course, if I had detected some wrongdoing in my own media corporation, of course, I wouldn't go to a journalist of this corporation. I mean, that's the least I would say. But of course, there is no wrongdoing of which I know, so I have no risk there. But anyway, of course, in this case, try to go to a media corporation which is competing and where you might see a chance that someone is there to do the story.
Are media more open to this way? I mean, internally, because they deal with whistleblowers, are they more open to their own whistleblowers, or they're same as anybody else when it comes to themselves?
I think that any company wants to protect their secrets, and of course, also media corporations they are not run by journalists, but they are run by
managers,
ordinary managers, or more or less ordinary managers, and they are governed by the principle of wanting to earn money, and scandals are damaging your profit eventually. So, yeah.
Eileen, I would like to address you finally. If I was approaching you as a whistleblower and asking for you to guarantee me full anonymity, what would be your response? Do I have to take some responsibility for what am I providing?
It depends on the individual case, but we work with journalists who actually guarantee the whistleblower protection. And that's why it's so important to not just approach any journalist, but to approach a journalist who's trusted and who will try their best to protect the whistleblower. And one such person, which I'd just like to mention, that Gavin McFadden was such a journalist and who felt so strongly about whistleblowers being protected that's why he co-founded the Whistler with us. So there are many, many good journalists out there, and depending on the whistleblower's circumstances and what the issues are, every case is different, they will offer the whistleblower protection if that's what's needed, yeah.
Thank you. We devoted this panel to Gavin, so you were not with us at the beginning. I said that at the beginning, but thank you for mentioning him again. And Jasmine, finally, do you ever at least slightly regret for what you have done? Microphone, so.
Again. No, I don't regret, no.
But your life would be probably much different if you didn't do what you did.
Yes, of course, I have suffered, and I know that I will suffer for the rest of my life because I have to bear these atrocious memories. It's the memories which is very difficult, more than financial situation or other things. But still, I don't regret because I am in harmony with my own convictions. There is a poem by Rumi, Persian poet, who says, "I lost everything, but I found myself."
And when you started this battle, Have you thought it is going to be as tough as it became?
No, that was another disappointment. I really thought that there would be an investigation into my allegations. I didn't even believe that the company management will try to overlook what I'm saying. As I mentioned, I was participating in the development of our food safety management system, and that was not what I thought we should happen really in such a case like mine. So this was all a surprise. So
And you expected media to be responsive, to respond immediately?
I expected the media to be more interested, and I would like to also say that the role of the media is tremendously important in the modern society, because by experience I know both politicians and also private sector companies are under the influence of public opinion, and the public opinion is very much influenced by what media writes, less about social networking, but what newspaper and media writes, because they believe, and wrongly, that journalists always what they write is checked so that they can have trust in what is written, and what is written is what is the truth, and that's another thing which I also discovered. So the role of the media is very important, and for me, I felt that by involving the media, I can start a debate, we can improve our system, we can change things, we can reveal our dysfunctions. But there's another reason why the media is important. Because in a small country, particularly like Switzerland, you know, it's very easy to overlook the right of a victim and to judge the case based on what the political power or economic power wants. So for me, that the media report on my case is important, that to give a signal to Switzerland that you are being watched. And my case is about public health and human rights. Two big issues are at stake here. And I would like to make this, to give the signal that you are being watched for your decision. And that's so that I am not again, my right again be violated. I mean, I've been once when I was in the company, and now in the justice system. So that's why it's so important.
Thank you for sharing this with us, and this will end